Hello and welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. I'm Ben Hansen. If this is your first time clicking on a MinnMax thing, thank you. MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. I left Game Informer last year to start MinnMax. During my era at Game Informer, I interacted with a certain journalist named Mitch Dyer every once in a while from IGN. He was at IGN from 2011 through 2016, and then after that, he went on to write Star Wars games, maybe a little bit more, up there at EA Motive in Montreal. And surprise, he's leaving EA, which is big news here. So we wanted to get him on a MinnMax interview and actually talk through why he's leaving, what he thought about that transition back in the day from going from IGN to EA Motive. What's it like to write Star Wars games overall? Last week on MinnMax's YouTube channel, I created a video that actually chronicled the history of EA Motive and the tease of EA's big new IP that team is making up there. This was disconnected from Mitch. I just made that and then found out that, hey, apparently Mitch is leaving. So we lined up this interview there. But if you want a little more backstory on what EA Motive has been up to from the outside perspective, you can check out that video on our YouTube channel. Also, just a heads up, if you want to unlock the podcast version of this, if you don't want to watch it on YouTube but actually listen to it, you can support MinnMax at the $5 tier. It's a great way to support us. We'd appreciate it. You unlock this. You also get early access to the MinnMax Show podcast, early access to Leo Vader's new video essays, the podcast version of our huge game club discussions that we call The Deepest Dive. We've done Chrono Trigger. We did Outer Worlds. We did Final Fantasy VII Remake, my favorite. We also just wrapped up a huge game club discussion on The Last of Us Part 2. So if you're looking for the best, most thorough discussion on the internet for that game, please check out The Deepest Dive. We'd appreciate it. Okay, a couple things to fill in before this interview begins. We talk a lot about Jade Raymond, who is a producer on the Assassin's Creed series, who then was tasked with building up EA Motive overall. Also, we talk about Mark Thompson, who's a director over there at EA Motive. He comes from Ubisoft, worked on the Far Cry series a fair amount. So in addition to a lot of EA Motive and Star Wars discussions and writing for games in general, we also talk about Mitch's time at IGN, and the pros and cons of working at IGN in that era. And it's an interesting conversation overall. So without further ado, here's Mitch Dyer. Mitch Dyer, welcome to MinnMax, sir.
Glad to be here, man. I haven't seen you in so long. This is really nice.
It's been a while. I'm trying to remember. It was probably the Mass Effect Andromeda cover story trip for Game Informer. We went up to Montreal.
Yeah, you guys came up.
Yep, got some drinks with Kim and Joe after that a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we were sharing an office at the time with BioWare.
Very complicated. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, Mitch, but you have some news for the world. Would you like to share this news?
Yeah, for those of you who know me, I'm a writer at Electronic Arts, or at least until now I was. But as of right now, I'm unemployed. I left EA at the end of July, and I have something lined up that I can't talk about. But yeah, I'm leaving EA, and I'm going to do something much smaller, and I'm going to keep writing video games in a very different way. But yeah, I've left full-time AAA employment during a global pandemic. I decided to become a contractor. So
okay, there's a lot.
Good luck to me.
Okay, where's that coming from? The idea of leaving the role behind of writing on Star Wars projects for an ambiguous, as yet to be defined VR project from the outside is like, wow, there's got to be something fueling that tank there.
Yeah, and it's ways like I'm looking at stuff like just indie projects in VR as something completely different than what I'm doing now, right? Like Star Wars Squadrons has VR elements in it.
Oh, right.
But it's not the same, right? There's considerations you have to make when you're thinking about narrative in VR, but when your game isn't fully VR, it's a different mindset. So I'm excited to dig into something a little different there. But yeah, it's definitely a surprising move for sure, I guess, for myself even, right? Like I got into game writing to make Star Wars. Like I went to Motive in Montreal specifically to write the campaign for Star Wars Battlefront II. Stayed aboard, worked on Star Wars Squadrons. And yeah, it's like, that was like the dream for me. Like I never really thought that would be something I could ever do, is contribute to Star Wars, especially in Battlefront, which means a lot to me, and Squadrons, which is, spiritual successor to X-Wing and TIE Fighter and Rogue Squadron, games that mean so much to so many people. It's ridiculous. Like it is an opportunity unlike any other, and I don't think that I'll ever have it again. It is really like a once in a lifetime thing for real. So to give that up is a very weird feeling, and it felt bad to leave Motive. Like it hurt, and I kept having these meetings in my last week, and everyone's like, "Last week, man, like you got to be stoked." I'm like, "Yeah, but my heart fucking hurts doing this, like leaving this team and leaving these projects behind." Like my work on Squadrons is basically complete. The game it's got a couple months to go before it ships, but like for the most part, my work, the writing aspect is complete. You know, polish here and there to be done. But Jo Barry, the senior writer on that game, she's going to be just fine without me right now. But yeah, like I'm shaking it up and I'm ready for something different and new and smaller and weirder in my career. So I'm looking at, you know, jumping into the contract pool and figuring out what that looks like.
I like the weirder addendum in there. So it's not a matter of you leaving for like a greater IP than Star Wars, because that's impossible. But it's the scope, it's the flexibility that's attractive to you. Oh wait, is it IP?
It's I can't even say. But no, it's not like an IP thing, right? Like for me, it's when I came into it, obviously Star Wars was the thing for me, and it still is. It is my favorite thing. It is like all the, you know, we do the usual typical tirade of like, it's the reason I want to tell stories. I loved it as a kid, but everybody has that experience. We all know it. We all share it. It's great. But for me now, like having written games now for 4.5 years or something, whatever it's been, I realize now that I've been making games longer than I was at IGN, which is incomprehensible to me, because that was where I just like became a human being in my life in my 20s in San Francisco, was at IGN.
Of course.
But yeah, and now like years later, it's not really IP that draws me to a project or not, right? Like it's not like, oh, like I want to do Assassin's Creed as an example. It's not an Assassin's Creed as an example, just because it's cool IP that I like. It's, you know, it's interesting. There's obviously a lot of amazing IP out there. Very exciting to work on many of them. Looking forward to working on whatever IP I get to work on. But for me, it's more about teams and projects. Like I look for interesting teams that have strong leadership and good work cultures, right? Like anti-crunch is a nice one in general. Like just the way that companies treat their employees, the way they think about how they're going to make games is really interesting. In addition to what kinds of games they're going to make and where they're going to make them, whether it's VR or these tiny, you know, PS4, PSN games, those kinds of things. Like there's just casting a wider net is just really interesting to me right now, and chasing a bunch of smaller projects is really interesting and exciting.
Yeah, it's almost like this
is
your
so many of them, dude. Like there's so many cool little games out there now.
Yeah. And, you know, with Star Wars on your resume, this is almost like your Knives Out, right? This is your Rian Johnson moment of like, all right, I made the big stuff. It looks great on the resume. Now I can actually cash in on that cachet.
Yeah, but let's be clear. I'd go back to Star Wars in a heartbeat. Like if you were like, hey, do you want to do a contract on a Star Wars game? Wink. Like I'm there in a heartbeat. I love it. I loved working on Star Wars. I loved working with Lucasfilm. I love that process of adding to that universe, especially now as they're doing like the High Republic stuff is really interesting. And I hope that's a direction that games go. Like, I have no idea what Lucasfilm's plans are for that, but it's like books and comics. I'm like, cool, like make a game about these cool Jedi. I want to play that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's go back in time. Let's go back in time to
Rewind.
You leaving IGN and then actually going to EA Motive. Like your first week or so. Walk me through that experience. What stands out? What strikes you?
So it was weird because I think I left IGN April 1st because my boss thought it was a joke. He thought I was joking when I told him I quit. Haha, April Fools. No, like I'm leaving. I think it was like the next week or whatever. Like I'm in EA's Redwood Shores office, right? And I've been there as Games Press, as IGN. I'd gone down there a ton of times when I lived in the Bay Area. It's just south of San Francisco. I'd been to that office a lot to see games and interview devs and whatever, review events and all sorts of stuff. So I go down to Ears and I'm going for the Star Wars Summit. And I don't really know what that means, right? We're a bunch of teams from EA who are making Star Wars are going to get together and talk about the future of Star Wars at EA. I'm like, oh, great, like cool. Like we'll talk about what Battlefront will be, and that's all I had really been thinking about.
Yeah.
But when I got there, it was like, here's the 5-year slate of Star Wars games to come. And it was a bunch of things that did and did not come out or haven't come out yet.
Was Squadrons on that list?
No, it wasn't. And we can talk about that a little bit more wide later.
Sure.
But no, it was not. It was a bunch of different games. I really wish I remembered more of them. But I was just so dazzled in the moment, like, holy shit. Like, I'm days removed from being a news editor at IGN.com. I should not be seeing this.
Yeah.
Like, nobody here should let me in. It's funny, I ran into Ian Millam when I was there. He was the creative director on Battlefield Hardline. He was the art director of Dead Space. He's working on The Mandalorian now at ILM.
Oh, wow.
I bumped into him, and he and I had known each other just from like I love Dead Space and Battlefield, and I'd met him through the years. And he's like, "What are you doing here? Like, you're not allowed to be here." I work here now, man. Like,
it is
a
just
different
that
world,
weird
and
feeling
I
of
agree that I don't belong here. But let's go.
But after you like see all that stuff, it's just that weird feeling of I could just walk back to the IGN office right now. I could just
I'll
post
just
this as a news story.
buddy. Have I got a scoop for you?
This is going to get so many dozens of hits. It's going to be awesome. What a weird thing. Okay, so it's got to be nice.
So that was day one. It was literally day one.
And it's kind of pressure-free for you, I'd imagine. You don't have to get up and give a presentation. You just get to sit back, get a feel for the group, and go, oh my God, all right, look at this, Battlefront 2.
It was nice because it was mostly, I was there with my team, my directors, like my game design director, my level design director, my game director, like high-level people, and then Mitch, who had never written a game before and had no idea what he was doing there.
Yeah.
So, like, I was just so out of my depth, but was trying to play it cool, man. But yeah, then it was like a bunch of different people were just giving presentations about these games, and it was wild. But I got to see my team talk about the game they wanted to make, because at the time, obviously, Battlefront didn't. I think Battlefront 1 had like recently shipped, and they were doing conception for what Battlefront 2 would start to look like. So it was early formation of what they were going to change and where they were going to go and what they were going to add and whatever else, right?
And you probably got to see Amy Hennig talk about Ragtag, right?
I might have gotten to see certain people talk about certain games behind closed doors.
And were you excited about these discussions?
I loved everything I saw in that room a lot.
Damn it, Mitch. Okay, so then you head back up to the team. Is there a moment then where you actually like open like a Google Doc and realize, oh God, what am I doing?
Yeah, it was fucking empty. Can you believe that? I had to make it myself.
Well, you got like, a long time ago, you got the whole preamble and then you're just lost.
Yeah, I had a few words to start with, which was nice.
Right.
But no, it was really nice because when I started, it was a very small studio. Motive was not a lot of people, right? Like it was Jade Raymond who had started the place, and then she had hired a few people like Jean-Francois Poirier, who was my producer, amazing guy. Mark Thompson, who was my game director, also amazing. And then a few other folks who basically it was just me and my co-writer Walt Williams, who wrote Spec Ops. He was my writing partner on Battlefront 2.
Yeah.
He and I basically just talked to the team. Hey, what excites you about Star Wars? What do you love right now? What excites you? What would you want to do, both in games and like what are you seeing in the films that's really interesting and intriguing? And what directions do you want? Throw my headphones around. What direction you want to go with this? Right? Like, there's tons of opportunity for the kinds of things we can do. And amid all of this, they had already built prototype for what Battlefront 2 would be. And it was hilarious because it was like a Microsoft Paint #2 on the original Battlefront splash screen. And then it was just a demo that they had whipped up. And it was like a few people had just done this. They were like, oh, we have Battlefront 1, let's make what's ostensibly a single player mission. And what amazes me about that prototype is we shipped it in the end. Like, it was in the game. Conceptually, it was basically like you deploy and you're in the air and you get shot down and you land on a Star Destroyer and you fight on top of a Star Destroyer and you fight your way inside. And that was so cool that we were like, we have to do this. Like, this is too rad not to actually put in the game. And it ended up becoming our ending. It was the Battle of Jakku. It was the last mission. It was the last thing you do in the game. So it was like a hilarious bit of poetry that the first time I played Star Wars Battlefront 2 and the last mission you played in Star Wars Battlefront 2, basically the same. With like 2 years of dev time on it. But yeah, it was all there. It was loosely put together software and cool ideas, and then it was just ideation of what do we want to do with this story, where do we want to go, who are the characters, and imagine from moment one we knew it was going to be an Imperial premise.
Yeah. So that's an awesome pitch. When we talk about what other people are excited by, they say, oh my God, seeing things from the Empire's point of view, what happens after the Death Star explodes, it's a cool angle. And then over time, does it get softened a bit? Like, let's throw some Luke Skywalker missions in there. Let's try and
no, because it's just so core to what Battlefront is, right? And that's a pitfall in its own right, because Battlefront is vehicles and it's characters, soldiers, and by characters I mean like iconic characters, right? Like Han, Luke, Leia, all these, Lando, recognizable characters that you love. They're core to what Battlefront is, right? They're part of the main gameplay loop. So to exclude that from a campaign felt wrong, but it was also really hard to deal with narratively of like, okay, well, why are we hanging out with Lando? What's Han Solo doing? How does it relate to our Imperial Special Forces group?
Oh God!
So trying to make these stories connect, because we could have just done, okay, and now what's Han doing? Totally unrelated. And that would have been really easy. I just don't think it would have been very good.
Yeah.
So we wanted everything in Battlefront 2's campaign to feed into Iden's story somehow, in a meaningful way.
How much discussion was there with Lucasfilm? Where they're saying, okay, we want a mission with Luke Skywalker, so he needs some sort of MacGuffin. What's a good MacGuffin for Luke? Oh, okay,
so
I guess
Luke's a good example. I think we talked about this maybe briefly during the press tour, but maybe not. I can't remember. So maybe I'm telling you something new that I shouldn't be. But we, during the process of pitching levels, right, we were pitching heroes, and it was like, okay, well, we want to do Lando, right? If we have to do these hero missions, we're doing Lando because Walt and I want to write Lando.
Yeah.
And we want to get Billy D. Williams. And originally it was like, well, Lando's not really planned for launch. We're like, we're doing Lando. And we pushed and we pushed and we pushed, and we, you know, everyone got on board because it's Lando and everyone's excited and everyone was very happy to accommodate. But Luke was the one where we were like, well, obviously we have to do Luke, right? Like he's Luke Skywalker. How do you do a Star Wars story set against this timeline immediately after Return of the Jedi and not touch on what Luke is doing, right? But the trouble we ran into is we needed a really good concept to justify what Luke was doing and how it fit into, you know, because he had to be on his own journey and we didn't really know what it was going to be.
Right.
The only thing we knew is like, okay, and then he's on this island where he doesn't talk to anybody, the end of the movie. So we were like, well, we have to fill that gap somehow. And we're not going to tell the full story. So what if we just tell the beginning of that story? And the concept that Walt and I came up with was whatever Luke is doing on this planet. One, he's a monk, right? He's a Jedi. He's a Jedi Knight. Father has just died. He's in a pretty raw place. Where does that leave him and what journey is he on? Well, okay, so he's probably in the pursuit of like Jedi texts and knowledge and that kind of stuff. And that led us down the path of, okay, well, he goes to this planet and he's in search of this thing and he doesn't really know why he's there, but the Force is pulling him there. And what he finds is some MacGuffin, and we didn't know what it was, that is the thing that leads him to the island in The Force Awakens. And that was just our high-level pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time we said, like, oh, yeah, you know, we're sketching out these missions, and Lucasfilm was like, okay, check. And we get to Luke, and they're a little more hesitant, right? They're like, ooh, we don't know. Luke's pretty special. And we're like, we know, but we really want to do it. And they're like, well, why do you want it? And we're like, oh, like, we hadn't really thought of that, right? Like, narratively, why is this important? Not just to Iden, but to Luke. So we started conceiving of a more substantial Luke mission, rather than just saying, we would like to do Luke, can we? And they're like, okay, but why? So we came up with this answer, and we gave it to them, and they were very, very into that idea. Because I feel like it was a pretty elegant way to bridge those stories without making it like the only connecting tissue.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how much had been established in that era, because, I mean, Aftermath had come out.
I think 1 and 2 had come out, because I think we got the third book during production.
Okay.
I think.
Gotcha.
But yeah, there was definitely at least one Aftermath book out. So we knew that there was, you know, there were these major players, and there was some going on in the Empire with like Ray Sloan and this mysterious admiral and whatever's going on in the Emperor's contingency plan.
Yeah.
Shattered Empire, the comic was out. So Operation Cinder was this like reactionary attack by the Empire across several worlds. And there were just a lot of interesting pieces in place that we definitely thought like, okay, cool. Like these are all here. There's no reason for us to ignore them, right? Like, Operation Cinder is the Imperial retaliation for the Death Star. That has to be core to our story about the Empire retaliating after the events of the Death Star. So we folded that in, but we did it in a way that kind of flipped the script, and you weren't participating in it, you were rejecting it.
Yeah. So in the end, how happy were you with the story of Battlefront 2? Do you feel like, yeah, that's largely what we're going for?
I am extremely proud of that game.
Oh, good.
I'm so happy with that story. And the characters, like we invented characters that I'm so proud of. We invented characters that mean a lot to people, that have, like, people have told us in like non-ironic ways that like Iden Versio changed my life. I think like I'm so glad to see myself in Star Wars. I love that there's a woman in charge, right? All these different people coming forward and just saying that this character means something to them, and they're making art about her, and there's all sorts of fan fiction about like her and Del Mico, and it's like, this is beautiful. Like we just thought she was awesome, and Janina was a great cast. Yeah. And we were happy with what we were doing, but to see it resonate with people is like, it was unbelievable. It still kind of messes with me that story is not just like cool to people, but it matters.
Right. Okay. After writing Star Wars stuff for years and years and years, I want to know about Star Wars names. Coming up with Star Wars names. Because I'm trying to think in my mind of what makes it a Star Wars name, and it's a lot of vowels, I guess. But okay, let's just take Iden Versio, for example. How much back and forth is there? Is it just spitballing around a conference room going, that sounds Star Wars-y?
There's a little bit of that, like for the most part, right? And this is kind of my favorite thing about working with Lucasfilm is they're not very prescriptive. They're not, story group and production team is not there saying like, okay, so you're making Battlefront 2, here's what you can do. They're super open about what do you want to do? And then guiding you through that in a way that is not restrictive, but just in a way that fits within the confines of what Star Wars is and where it's going.
And who is this? Is this Pablo Hidalgo, or is this a run down from him? Or
yeah, I don't know who's actually on the story team now, because they've done some shuffling a little bit. But at the time, we were working a lot with Pablo Hidalgo, Leland Chi, Matt Martin, Steve Blank, Orion Kellogg, Michael Daly, like all these people from the story group and production team, all in these meetings with us, kicking around ideas, right? Yeah. Like we were throwing around story beat ideas, gameplay beat ideas. We'd done a couple story summits at Lucasfilm. Like we went there and like sat in the room with them. We're like, all right, cool. Like Aiden's dad, who is he? Let's break him down. Whiteboard. Everyone's throwing out ideas and lines of dialogue, he might say, just to crack who that character is. But with names, it's the same deal, right? Like you come to the table and you tell them what, like, hey, this is this character. This character's name is Aiden Versio. And unless it's like, hey, that translates into a weird thing in another language, or hey, that name already exists in Star Wars somewhere and we don't want to duplicate it. Most of the time, it's fairly clean to get names through. I think for the most part, the names that we ship were our first pass name. Del Mico was our first pass name, because that was the name I'd used in the script for the sample that I wrote for a character. So I was just really happy and proud of Del Mico as a name.
Yeah.
Aiden Versio was Walt came up with that name. I think we kind of tinkered with the last name a little bit between us, just trying to figure out like what sounds nice, what's got a good roll to it.
So sounds nice versus sounds Star Wars. That's the distinction I'm trying to figure out. What sounds Star Wars?
I don't know, because I don't think there's a science to it. I think it's gut. I think it's all feel.
Okay.
But you hear a name and you're like, it's just not right, is it? It's got too many consonants or too many like hard like sounds in it. It's unpleasant to my ear.
But then there's those weird things, I always get up in my head about Star Wars names and I think, oh yeah, it's just Ben and Luke are some of the most iconic Star Wars names, so you can't rule anything out at that point.
His name is Owen Lars. Like that's just a dude's name. That's just a German guy, right? Yeah. Like that dude's absolutely a human on this earth. But obviously Han Solo is like, oh, okay, it's like a little funkier.
Right.
I think maybe what makes it is it sounds a little different than what Western convention or like our very North American expectation of what a name is.
Right.
I think it's that, but it still sounds believable, right? It still sounds like a person and not a totally wacky alien identity or something, right? Yeah. It still sounds vaguely like, oh, that could be a person's name. Or a place that I could visit.
Yeah, I forget if it was on a podcast. I remember Jeff Cork, my old coworker, being obsessed with it. But somewhere he just heard that Jay Leno's wife's name is Mavis Leno. It's like, well, that's the most perfect Star Wars name. Of course there's a Mavis Leno. It just has to be Star Wars.
Yeah, there's an author who writes a lot of really awesome books about like sailing and whaling. Her name is Jer Tisk. Same deal, like that, great.
Oh, the helmet on Jared Tisk is just incredible, yeah.
And that one's so good. Tisk is such an amazing name. I'm sad I couldn't use that.
Okay, that 5-year slate you saw, however long, the Star Wars rundown of games. The Vancouver open worldish game wasn't in there?
I'm trying not to say too much because I don't know what my NDA says.
Sure.
But I will say, yeah, there was a bunch of different kinds of games on that slate, right?
Okay.
Open world games, action adventure games, because EA's Star Wars portfolio was broadening. It's like Galaxy of Heroes, Battlefront action adventure. Trying to think. I think there were like Respawn's game was on there. The Respawn Jedi game was on. It didn't have a name or anything. It was just the Respawn game. Yeah, and then there was just like blank slates for like at this point in this fiscal year a Star Wars product.
Something. And Squadrons wasn't on there because that was kind of a later pivot.
No. Yeah, Squadrons is a weird one. It came about in like a really indie way. And the best thing about that team and making that game is it really felt like what I imagined an indie team would be doing, but we just had like AAA backing of a massive publisher, which was amazing. And now I'm going to have water and continue.
Please.
So Squadrons basically, it wasn't in EA's portfolio at all. And there was a team at EA Motive that just really wanted to do it, right? A few people at Motive, just like 2 or 3 guys were like, it'd be cool. So we did like an X-Wing versus TIE Fighter Rogue Squadron kind of first-person pilot. Bring that back.
Yeah.
And it was just talk, right? But very conveniently, we had just shipped and we were shipping and we were about to ship Battlefront. So we had all these systems and assets that they could just get to work with. And they built a couple, demos and prototypes just to see like, is there something here? And immediately everyone's like, this is fucking cool. Like, let's definitely do this. And more people got invested and more people got on board, and we're just chipping in to help out build this prototype of what this game would be. And then that just grew into internal enthusiasm at Motive, elevating it to EA. EA going, holy shit, this is awesome, green light. And then the game became what it is, right? And I think you see the spirit of that, of the indie-ness of that, and just kind of the grassroots passion project-ness of it, in that the game is, it's really focused. It's got, the dogfights, the fleet battles, the campaign, customization. It's all there. And it's like, it's a $40 product, no microtransactions.
Yeah.
And that was all stuff the team was just like, we want this, this, and this, right? We want it to be accessible. We want it to be affordable. We want as many people to be able to play this cool game as possible. And that spirit is just like core to the Maverick team.
I'd imagine
the Star Wars Squadrons team.
Yeah, I'd imagine a lot of it too is, I'm sure it's my eyes would drop out of my skull if I saw the price tag of the game, but I'm sure it's a relatively cheap game overall. Like, we have the tech for Battlefront 2, we have a lot of the models built, we need to construct a lot of stuff around that, but it's not gonna, bankrupt EA here.
You end up doing a lot of new work because it's a different art direction for Squadrons. It ends up being new character models and different head scans, and everything's different in its own way, but you definitely have the tech to build upon, and we have the relationship with Lucasfilm, so it's like assets are coming in both ways, and we just have access to a lot of the experts at Lucasfilm who can help us out with these things as we need them.
Yeah. Do you see it as a little bit of a test for EA overall? Like, let's try releasing this standalone microtransactions free thing. If it wins, then the Rebels win, and if it fails, then the dark side wins.
I hope it does well, man. Like, separate from the fact that I'm on it, I do think it's an interesting win for EA if Squadrons does really well.
Yeah.
Because one, it proves that $40, ostensibly AAA games, like I think it is a AAA game, at a $40 price point is viable. It's obviously not going to be viable for every team and every product, but I think it's proving a point. I also think that it's interesting that the no microtransactions thing becoming a conversation point is like, it's obvious that's the case.
Yeah.
But I hope that that the game changes the conversation around microtransaction. I hope it does. I hope it changes the way that people talk about microtransactions, especially regarding EA, because it's not every product. It's not in every game. It's not ruining games in the way that I think a lot of cynical people think it is.
Right. Well, it's interesting just that EA has had that messaging over the last 3 years of every time they're on a press conference stage, it's, and no microtransactions, hold for applause, look at this, what do you hear? We did that bad thing for a long time, and now we're not doing it as much. Praise us. It's just,
and
it's
you're
a weird
always going to see it
beat.
in stuff. Like FIFA Ultimate Team, I think, is always going to have it, right? Because it's part of the loop of that. And people love it. Like, it's not, paying for stuff is not always a bad thing, and I understand the hesitance, and yes, it can absolutely f*** up a game.
Yeah.
But I think that when done responsibly and done well, it can be really interesting. Like, I buy loot boxes all the time. I love buying loot boxes when Overwatch anniversary comes around or events roll out.
Right.
Because I love seeking that stuff out. I play a lot of Dota 2. I buy a lot of treasures in Dota 2, and they're loot boxes, right?
Right.
But it becomes this guarantee that you're going to get something that you want from this, even though there's an element of randomness. And I think that's probably the sweet spot for a lot of people.
Yeah. Coming from the journalism background, you must have been obsessed with messaging. It must have, I'm just projecting here, I'd imagine it'd be a frustrating spot to be in during, the hurricane of Battlefront 2's launch, free-to-play stuff, and you're just screaming, just message this, just angle it this way, just please do something, but that's not your role. So you'd have to check your ego and sit back and just watch, right?
It's hard not to... It's hard not to feel like you have the answers too, and I think that it's probably true of a lot of game devs. Hopefully it's not just me being a little... I don't know. But I feel like it's easy to look at something and say just do it this way. Why didn't they just do that? They should do this instead as a reaction. And it's easy to say those things, but getting buy-in from a team and unifying the messaging of a product that has an established vision for the marketing beats, it does require a lot of careful thought. Thank you for honking outside, whoever that was. But yeah, so it's easy to look at something and go, just do this. But it's like, oh God, that has so many downstream effects, and there's so many reasons we can't or shouldn't do that. So yeah, it's I still definitely had that vibe when I was in the media of they should do this instead.
Right. And
but it is other people, right? There are experts in the marketing team who know way better than I do what they should do, and then they do those things, and then Battlefront recovers amazingly.
Yeah. Can you add any insight into what it was like inside that studio when Battlefront 2 was being just rung through the ringer?
It sucked. Like, it was not fun to see the game, especially for motive, right? We worked on the campaign, the microtransaction. So here's the frustrating thing for me, especially, right? Aside from, okay, that wasn't us. We had no connection to the loot boxes thing at all. But obviously, it's our project, and DICE is our partner, and we want to support. Like, we were feeling for them.
Yeah.
So we were feeling the hurt for that. Oh man, like, this game that we thought was cool is like really getting hammered in the media, justifiably and otherwise. But what was really frustrating to me is a lot of the stuff that people complained about in the early access, or the Origin Premiere or whatever it was called, people who got the game early for like paying for the service.
That's right, yeah.
Where the economy issues started to rise up, that stuff was removed from the game before the game shipped. It literally did not ship with those issues. So that's what really grinds my gears, is like, yeah, there were problems with the game and they were immediately fixed.
But it's a tough thing of, it was sent out to reviewers, and reviewers are like, well, I have to review the build I have. And I imagine you, out of anybody, has that perspective of like, what are they supposed to do?
And it's like, that was their experience, right?
Yeah.
We gave them the game and the conditions, and they are fairly talking about the conditions of that product. So it is what it is, and it sucks on the inside to be like, it's not, but we fixed, shit. So it was a bad situation that, you know, obviously everyone got behind immediately. Like, DICE totally redesigned their economy. They paused all microtransactions for like months. They were like, okay, the economy is just, it's all earned, go.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a huge risk for them. Huge. Because it's such an investment to build an economy around the expectation that people will pay for these randomized loot boxes, and that will feed into their career and whatever. So to just strip all that out and say, you're right, we're sorry, we'll fix it, is not a small deal. Like, that is major effect.
Yeah. How often did people in the studio, even, you know, it was a sister studio, but with BioWare Montreal, you being right next to them, like, how often do people come to you with questions about the press and be like, hey, Mitch, you understand how this works. Why are we being like this? What's going on here?
A lot. And I think it's because this is probably my own fault, because I definitely presented myself as being more of an expert in media than in storytelling.
Interesting.
But it was an insecurity thing. Like, I think looking back, like, I realize now, like, okay, I was qualified. I did deserve that job. I did work for it and earn it and whatever. But I definitely had positioned myself as like, I'm new. I'm willing to learn. I want to hear feedback of all kinds from all people. But I'm really fucking good at this media thing. So people always had questions of like, oh, you worked at IGN. What goes on with this? Like, what's it like when you review? Like, tons of questions. Like, it was like devs having access to somebody from a media outlet who they could just ask these questions, and it was like flipping the tables a bit, right? Because I'm so used to asking devs about their process,
right?
But having folks go like, oh, hey, like, you reviewed my game. You really liked Far Cry 3. That's really cool. Like, what was the? And it's just it's a completely different kind of conversation. Like, having to now explain how media works to devs, and I took for granted, like, oh, not everyone knows how this works like I do. And that's true of any profession, right? It's true of games media, it's true of game development. There's always a lot more going on than you take it for granted, because it's your world.
Yeah.
So it's obvious to you, and it's not to everyone else.
How much did you grow on that storytelling front outside of your media expertise, just on basic storytelling, game writing in general?
A lot.
Okay, where are you at these days?
I owe a lot to Walt Williams. He was an amazing mentor. But he always treated me like an equal, right? Like, Walt was the lead writer on Battlefront 2. I was the writer. I was very new to making games. I had no idea what I was doing. I had written, right? Like, I got the job because I had written, and I had showed that I could write, and I showed a degree of knowledge about how one might tell a story within a video game. And then when it came down to brass tacks and we started making it, it was really just like writing a script. It was, because Battlefront was such an interesting experience because there was no team yet. We were building motive, we were building the game, we were building the studio at the same time. So what that meant was we had a little bit of room to just start fleshing out characters and story without really worrying about how it would become a game. Because we knew what the game was going to be. We knew it was going to be a Battlefront game.
Mm-hmm.
And there were, that we knew that meant soldiers, vehicles, flying, heroes, all that stuff. Obviously, we would have complications along the way as systems changed, and we realized, like, oh, like, this is awesome. We can do something even better. Let's do that instead. But it really just meant that we could focus on what kind of story we wanted to tell. and start really high level, and then drill down and figure out like, okay, break it out into different missions. Each mission is broken down into different beats. Different beats have different kinds of dialogue, whether it's combat barks or banter that builds character or things that kind of hint at what's to come. And it comes in phases. So to begin with, I was confident in myself as somebody who can write a script. I'm confident in my dialogue, especially. Like, I think that's the one thing. If I'm ever going to be self-aggrandizing, I think I'm pretty good at writing lines and conversations. So we just started there. And then the more the game came online, the more we were like, oh, okay, like there's a different kind of pacing or tone going on here than we anticipated. Now we have to course correct. And it really was, okay, high level, we know what the themes of the game are and what the story is going to be. And the more the game crystallized and came together, the more we were just making tweaks along the way to make sure it was the characters were the strongest they could be in the scenarios they were in.
Yeah, okay. So it wasn't too much of a 5-alarm fire at all times, being flexible, tweaking things along the way.
I mean, game dev always kind of is at some point for everybody, but for story, honestly, it was, and probably because we had a lot of support. Like, we had a lot of trust and buy-in from our game director, who was very narratively minded. So he was basically our editor and immediate point of contact with like, hey, is this scene working? I wrote this thing. Can you check it out? And he was interested because, hey, it's a new scene in Star Wars. So we would just get lots of really good, rapid feedback internally from people we trusted. And then when it went out to Lucasfilm, they just made everything so much stronger. Like, their notes were super helpful. I really loved working with Story Team. They were always challenging us and pushing us to be better. They always took us really seriously, which I loved.
Yeah.
Like, we came in and we thought like, oh, Story Team, that's a big deal. Lucasfilm Story Group, they're the people, they make the movies. And we thought we'd be just treated as some fucking video game. But they did not treat us like some fucking video game. They treated us like I expect a film is treated. They gave us a lot of attention. They really took us seriously. They held us accountable for what we were doing and how we were going to achieve it. Like, it was really nice to have like a bunch of collaborators who were invested in what we were doing and really cared about the characters we were building. Because they cared too, right? Like, it's Star Wars. Nobody cares about it more than Story Group. Yeah. So they want to make sure that everything not just fits, but is quality. Because they're storytellers. They're not just gatekeepers. Like, I feel like when I was doing the media tour for Battlefront, all the questions were like, so what's it really like working with Lucasfilm?
Yeah.
Like, it's fucking awesome. They're so great. I love them. There's guardrails because you want things to feel like Star Wars and you don't want to do things that break movies that you don't know about. So they have to kind of guide you away from things or towards certain things. But invariably, their notes were always really substantive and helpful and really pushed the characters in directions that made them stronger and more memorable and likable. And it's just awesome.
Was there
loved it, genuinely.
Was there a lot of fun, like, reading the tea leaves of like, why were they trying to steer us away from this character?
Oh yeah, there's all sorts of stuff.
Possibly mean.
We definitely had pitched a few things where I pitched a set piece at one point that they were like, you can't do that. We're like, oh, okay. Like, and their feedback never came back with like, no, the end. It was always, okay, this isn't going to work, but what we can do is A, B, or C, or like, let's get on a call and figure out alternative. But I remember there was one set piece we were talking, oh, this would be cool. And they were like, can't happen. And we didn't know why. And we're like, okay, cool. Like, it's probably in Rebels or a movie or something. We'll figure it out someday. Last Jedi comes out and Holdo light speeds through a Star Destroyer. And we were like, that's why we couldn't do light speed through a Star Destroyer.
The only reason, forget it.
But it's vindicating because you're like, oh man, we're on the same page as everyone else making Star Wars. That awesome. Says something. Like, everyone's thinking of the same cool shit. That's really awesome. I love that.
And I'm guessing your sound design wouldn't have been quite as bold and cool as the one they went with for Last Jedi either.
No, it would have been loud for sure, as opposed to the movie, which is just
it's
beautiful.
So cool. What was the worst Star Wars pitch you heard? Did you ever hear something from somebody along the way and you said, that is just absurd, you can't pitch this? That isn't Star Wars.
Probably, but I can't think of anything.
Okay, all right, maybe that's a good sign.
Honestly,
overall.
like, there was no standout, like, it's fucking crazy, what are you doing? There was something we didn't do that I wasn't really hot on. Like, there was a concept we had talked about doing. It's cool, but I don't know if it's really Star Wars. And we kicked it around, and I thought, okay, we'll do this. And we, eventually just things change, and you focus on different directions, and just try out your creative path leads you in different directions depending on where the production is going. So we ended up not doing this, but it was really validating to see DICE make Ewok Hunt as a game mode, because we had talked about doing a single player mission where like stormtroopers are in this Andor base and there's Ewoks and it's a thunderstorm and you see like lightning flash and you just see a little dude with a spear and you're like, it's like a horror movie and you're like sneaking through and there's Ewoks as like horror movie monsters. And we were like, this is cool, but I don't know if it'll work. And that's not why we didn't do it. It was, we just, tons of changes to the script meant we didn't want to be on Endor any longer than we had to be.
Right. But
it was just, as you're kicking around ideas, you try on everything. Yeah. And some stuff works and some stuff doesn't. And that was one where I was like, I don't think this works, but let's definitely try it out. And I was so glad, like, Ewok Hunt comes out and it's like, that's this. They made that dream come true. It's so good. It's the perfect
thing. Like, it's going to pop on social media. You got it all. It's not breaking canon in a big way. Yeah, it's everything. Okay, outside of things are harder than you could expect, and there's probably a reason that the devs didn't do this, what were other big realizations you had being in a dev studio after all these years? Of just, I never appreciated this, or this is more challenging than I thought.
That every single thing you wish was different about a game is significantly more expensive than you think it is. And that every idea you have or every solution you have to a problem, 100% somebody already thought of it on the dev. Like, we try everything. We throw around so many ideas. And for innumerable reasons, things do and don't happen. And some of them are interesting and some of them are not, right?
Right.
Mundane reasons lead to features getting cut or a reduction in characters or whatever, right? Like, it's just not working having 4 people in Inferno Squad. What if we just did 3?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of stuff, right? It's just the nature of timelines and budgets and dev team size. It all comes at a cost, right? So it's like, okay, cool. Maybe you did want this feature, and yes, we could have done it of any game, not we, just me, of any game, any desire you have. Sure, that could happen, but it might also come at the cost of a feature that you really love, or an entire chapter that changed your life. So it's all trade-offs. It's all investments. It's all putting your energies in the right places based on the time you have and the people you have and the money you have and all the business ends of it, right? But everybody's always trying their best. Everyone's trying to make things that are awesome. Nobody on a dev team is trying to phone it in. Everyone's doing their dangest to make something fun or cool or beautiful or whatever. I had one more thing I wanted to button on that, but I can't. Oh, QA. QA people are fucking amazing. QA people are the best people on development teams, and they don't get enough credit. And in fact, people rag on them way too much, both in the development community and in like live streams. Like anytime I see a streamer or like a speedrunner saying, "Oh, QA did a bad job on this game," Shut your mouth. You're wrong. You have no idea what you're talking about. QA is amazing. QA definitely called out that bug. They definitely found it. It's not their fault that there's bugs in the game. They didn't make them. They're finding them. They're raising the concerns to the team, and the team is doing their best to get rid of them. It's all a nice team effort of trying to make a cool thing. Leave QA people alone. They're awesome. Give them promotions.
What did you learn about like studio leadership working at EA Motive? You mentioned Mark Thompson before. Like I remember on the Far Cry 4 cover story trip, he seemed like kind of had a slight punk rock edge to him. Seems like he probably really enjoyed that idea of like pushing Squadrons through if he was involved.
Mark has the baddest ass tattoos of anybody at Motive.
Exactly.
And he's a very calming force. I like Mark a lot. He was like a nice like emotional center for me because I could come to him with any problem. Like, this is pissing me off and I can't really fix it, or like I need some guidance. Is this good? And he would always have good feedback for me. Yes, this is working. Chase this. No, this isn't working at all. Try this. Like I love working with Mark. He was an awesome guy to have reviewing our scripts. He was an awesome dude to have in charge of that game. Ants, set up. Sorry. Yeah, I had a great time working with Mark. He and I got along really great, really early on. Like even during my interview process with them.
Because you like Far Cry 3.
I did, yeah. And I interviewed Mark. It was funny. I interviewed Mark for Far Cry 3 after the game came out. And it was, he's the lead level designer on that game, and we talked, and I was like, yeah, cool. Like, what's it like to make these, like, badass open world game where you can do anything in these levels? And what's it like to build levels that are believable in this wacky island?
Yeah.
We had that conversation. It was great. And then when I got the phone call to interview for the job, and I went to meet those people for coffee, I was like, I know you.
Oh, that's perfect.
Which helps, right? It helps to have that connection because it just eases off a little bit of the pressure. And it's like, we didn't know each other at all, but it was like, some level of familiarity makes this easier. I feel like I can talk to you a little more.
Yeah, for sure. Did you learn anything from Jade Raymond, who was the head of studio for years and years?
Oh my God, so much. I learned that leading a studio is really hard.
Yeah.
Keeping like, especially while you're building a game at the same time. Like Jade was amazing. I loved working with Jade. She was always really open to hearing the studio's feedback, like people on the team. Like she would just patrol the floors and like, hey, how's it going? And not just like check in, see you later. But like, what are you working on? Show me, not like I know prove your work to me, but like, no, I'm engaged in what you're doing. I want to see it.
How do you set that tone versus not freaking developers out? I think if Jade Raymond came up to me and was like, hey, what are you working on over here? I'd be like, yeah.
Yeah, it's intimidating, man, because she's Jade Raymond. But then I just give you a genuine answer because you're genuinely interested. And now we're just two people talking about the same thing that we're interested in, which is this project we're building and this studio that we're building.
Yeah.
So she made a really healthy relationship with folks really early on, I think. And it was part of the normal day that like, oh, Jade's coming by, not to scare me, but to just talk to me. And it was like, I loved that part of my day. Like every Friday, like everyone having drinks and like kicking back at their desks, and Jade would come hang out with people and talk about project and our weekend plans and what they wanted from the studio. And she was just very transparent about everything with everybody. She was very receptive to feedback from people. Honesty was like core tenet of the studio when she was in charge. Like it was just a main thing that she pushed for all the time. Rigorous honesty. And it was such a nice experience for me coming in and never having done this.
Yeah.
And I think obviously it comes from experience. She had been around the block in the industry for so long, and she had worked with so many different kinds of people. I think she knew the kind of studio she wanted to build and the kinds of people she wanted to bring there.
Yeah. So what was it, last week? Something like that. I released a video on our YouTube channel kind of unpacking the mysterious new IP. And you don't need to give hot deets on this new IP.
I can't, but I'll do what I can.
But, EA Motive was founded, I believe, on the idea of like, let's build some new IP for EA. Has not exactly been released yet. They showed some teases of this project, Project Gaia, I believe. But I'm curious, like, what is the general tone? Is it frustration within the studio that this thing isn't further along? Like, what was Jade Raymond's tone? Is she throwing a vase against the wall every other week about like, God, we got to move faster?
No, not at all. No, Jade is a very creative person as well, which I didn't anticipate, right? Like, you hear about any studio head or producer and like, even in games media, I didn't really know what those roles were and what the importance of them was. And the more I'm learning now is like different roles at different studios mean different things, right? Like the job I'm doing at Motive would have been described as a narrative designer at one place, but maybe not at another. Some writing involves narrative design, sometimes it doesn't. Some producers are creatively involved and some of them aren't. Jade was super creatively involved. She was always looking at the stuff we were doing, and we would always give presentations to her for everything. Here's what we're doing for the art, the story, for the game. Here we're doing a build review. She would always have meaningful feedback, and it wouldn't just be I don't like it, I don't do something differently. It was like, yeah, she'd been around the block, man. Like Jade Raymond knows what the hell she's doing.
She knows the project.
Sometimes some of the best new IPs that have ever existed.
Yeah.
So her feedback meant a lot. Like, and we took it all very seriously, and it was very collaborative, and it never felt like authoritarian or anything. Like it was really great.
Yeah. And then it just turns out building new IP is harder than
it's so hard, man. Like it's true of anybody, and my exposure to it is more limited than most people. Some exposure, but not a ton. But yeah, it's hard. You talk to anybody who's making any new IP or has made new IP, and it's pulling teeth because you don't know what you're doing. And you can have a crystal clear vision of what you want the game to be and what you want the world to be, but then actually achieving those things is not easy, especially while you're building a studio at the same time and building another Star Wars game at the same time.
Yeah, that's why it just blows my mind.
Making games takes time.
Yeah, and it blows my mind looking at a studio like Guerrilla that can turn around Horizon Zero Dawn in what feels like the blink of an eye. I mean, the fact that they were there for the launch of the PS4 and it's like, and then we'll just make a whole new IP, a genre we've never done before, and basically nail it.
Especially coming off Killzone. Like, yeah. Going from Shadowfall to Horizon is such a huge leap, but I'm sure a lot of the stuff they learned technologically on Shadowfall built a lot of the foundation for what they would be able to do with Horizon. And that, it's a completely different genre. It's completely different character movement, abilities, navigation systems. It's all new.
Yeah.
But, they shipped a game on that tech and for that system. So they had the support system they needed and the tech and the tools to make it happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's impressive.
It's
People who make games constantly astound me. Like, I've been in it for 4 years, and I still don't know how any of the shit gets done. At all.
Yeah, it's been fun watching you, tweet throughout the years about every time there's an open position for the new IP, you're always like, please help us build new IP, please. It feels like, from the outside again, it feels like you're all pushing a big rock up a hill. Like, come on, please, we can help push this thing. Let's go.
That's just game dev. That's any project.
Yeah.
You can be making Star Wars, you can be making new IP, you can be making Assassin's Creed 10. They all have their own challenges, right? Solving the IP problem, what is this IP and what makes it an interesting franchise that you can do more of over time, that's a separate problem. Then you have to build these things individually, one at a time, and they all come with different features, and every sequel comes with new expectations that it's going to be bigger and better and deeper, and it becomes a rabbit hole of like big investments in new features, and sometimes they don't work, and then sometimes they really do. If you look at Assassin's Creed boat stuff, right? Like, look how much mileage they're getting out.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's not just like, oh, and also it has some boat shit. It's like, no, like boating is core to the game, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey rips because of it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so did you work on the new IP?
I spent a year after Battlefront not working on Star Wars.
There we go. Okay, perfect. Are you frustrated? What is your general sense of this era of Motive? Is it frustration? Is it just a deeper appreciation? How would you define it?
Deep appreciation. Watching that team build whatever they're building, amazing. Like, it's challenging and it's hard to figure out any vision. And they've got a good one. I can't talk about it at all.
Well, we've seen some more physics-y
a little bit
focused stuff, yeah.
It's funny watching people piece it together. I can't talk about it at all, but watch it. Like, I love seeing people try to figure out what that footage of Motive's new IP is.
The part that I don't understand is, like, the flying thing. Like, is the huge gun making him fly? Or is it like a hidden jetpack and the gun's disconnected, or whatever the hell that is? Overclocking? What the hell's going on over there?
This all sounds like you're narrative designing.
Yes, exactly. The gun makes you fly. I could be a game writer.
You're done. Just take my job.
That's perfect. Okay, let's say I could snap my fingers. You were in charge of EA. What would you do differently? What would you emphasize? What would you change? How can you make
I'd make a lot more single player games.
Interesting.
It's selfish. It's purely because I just like them.
Yeah. But Jedi Fallen Order, I mean, it sold gangbusters last year.
Yeah, and I think having prestige single player games in your portfolio is amazing. Sony's really good at having them. God of War, Horizon, Ghost of Tsushima, Last of Us. Tons of amazing flagship new IP that is all narrative based and character focused. I'd love to see more of that. You see it a little bit with EA's originals, like A Way Out and Sea of Solitude. These are heavily narrative focused. They're smaller games, obviously, from external teams who are just passionately making kick-ass stuff. But internally, I'd love to see more investment in stuff like Jedi Fallen Order, for sure.
Okay.
Because I want more games like that from teams at EA that kick ass.
Right. Do you think you'd ever work for a big publisher again?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm not like I'm definitely entering the contract realm for me, not because of anything that like happened. It's definitely like I just want to do this. I feel this pull to do more and different and weirder kinds of projects. And it just felt like a nice step for now. It was a nice risk to take now. I'm in a very privileged position to be able to do that and take that risk right now, especially right now. It felt like a nice, refreshing thing for me. But yeah, like AAA comes with its own pitfalls, of course. Like it's hard to make games, man, and it's hard to make games with big teams. But big teams make fucking awesome games a lot of the time. And I liked being part of a big team, and especially at Motive, I felt like a lot of those people, especially in leadership and definitely on the team, like lots of people trusted me and didn't treat me like I was this newcomer who didn't know what the fuck he was doing. Like everyone always treated me like I was their equal, like I had something to add, and they valued my opinion, not just on Star Wars because I was a big dumb nerd about it, but because I had thoughts about like what we could do with our gameplay or how we might narratively make things more interesting. And obviously, like nobody's going to do everything you say, but it felt nice to work at a studio where my opinions were valued and we could have conversations about, you know, oh, this person thinks this. Let's talk about that and go down that road. And yes, let's absolutely do that. Sounds fucking great.
Yeah. Here's a real question. If you were to go back to the press, like IGN or whoever, how would being in a studio change the way you would want to cover game development?
Dramatically.
What would you do instead?
It's funny because when I was leaving, one of my favorite people at the office, Charles, messaged, when I posted my goodbye post, like, hey, my last day is coming up. Charles jokingly posted that Mitch is going to go back to Games Press so that he can review Star Wars Squadrons, which I thought was brilliant. But I would never write a review again.
You just think the format's lame or just not your cup of tea?
No, I struggle with this. And I don't know that I've actually fully formulated these thoughts. So maybe I'll sound like an asshole or an idiot. But games criticism is important. I think it's very good. And I think there are so many phenomenal voices out there doing valuable game criticism. And I think that devs can take that criticism and use it to kind of guide improvements going forward and understand why people are responding certain ways to their game. It's great. And reviews will obviously never go away. They're definitely staying, but I don't think that I would ever feel comfortable reviewing a game again. Not because of the conflict of interest of like, oh, I've made a game, so now it's different. I just think it's... I should have thought about this so I could articulate it better. I don't know that the reviews that I would write would actually have meaningful effects like I used to think they would, right? Like when I was at IGN, I loved reviewing games. And I still, just getting to talk about games and especially in like at IGN where we just did tons of conversation style format stuff, It was awesome. But sitting down to write a review is always really hard. And trying to figure out how I'm evaluating this product and giving it a recommendation of some degree or not. To distill years of creative work and compromise, it's just not for me. Like it's just, It feels reductive. And that's just purely for me, not dissenting games criticism. I think it's amazing. It's just, that's just not how I think about games anymore, on like a review scale kind of perspective.
Just because you can see or have a little bit more of a glimpse to the other parts of the iceberg. Ultimately, you're seeing what's out there.
Stuff that I know about like how games are made now, they'd be like, ooh, like that's wrong in a review and maybe you shouldn't write that. Like that's bullshit feedback to give somebody as a dev. Like, oh, you don't know. So, or things were different and it was really hard for people. Like, yeah, that's all important. And we should definitely have that conversation about work and labor and crunch and how these things are happening.
Yeah.
But I don't really think that should affect like an IGN or a GameSpot review. I don't think that GameSpot critics should have to consider the working conditions of the people who made the game when evaluating the product, because they're not reviewing the studio. They are reviewing the game, and the game is what it is, and they're emotionally responding to it and articulating it in a way that helps people understand whether or not they'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
Great. That's a 10 out of 10 system. Love it. But for me...
It'll blow you away.
It'll blow you away. Your frothing demand will increase. But for me, I just don't think that I like thinking about games and I like writing about games. I don't like telling people whether or not they're going to like something.
Okay. So what would you do instead?
Assigning my perspective to somebody else's.
Yeah, so it would just be longer form interviews, more opinions, think pieces, or what would your outlet look like?
I think it'd be a little more specific breakdowns of things in games, right? Mm-hmm. Like stuff that gets kind of glossed over, right? Like we talk when they revealed the Ghost of Tsushima Wind.
Yeah.
Right? Amazing. What an amazing idea to simplify user interface and tell you where you need to go moment to moment in an open world. It keeps you out of the menus. Great. A+. Mm-hmm. And the game comes out and it's mentioned in all the reviews that this is how it works and it's good. But I think that's a feature that's worth digging into a little more, because I want to know how they got. I want to know what conversations they were having about their UI and UX that led them going down a path of, okay, well, what can we do in the world to keep people out of menus to navigate them around? And then in addition to that, that feature has narrative connotations that nobody's talking about.
Right.
Like the wind at your back is your father. Mm-hmm. And the birds in the trees singing that you follow, the songbirds you follow, are your mother. Like, it's just a throwaway line at the beginning when they introduce those systems. But I love the idea that, okay, not only is this improving the user experience from a moment-to-moment systemic level, but it's also something that becomes part of the loop. Okay, I'm exploring, swiping. I'll go that way. Cool. Now it's fundamentally changing how I explore the world. Now it keeps the players more engaged with the world rather than external systems like UI. And then you're giving a narrative wrapper that is emotionally impactful for the protagonist. I love that. I think it's a brilliant system, and I think I would dig into features like that. I would take very tiny things and make very big deals out of them.
Yeah, no, that's
rather
good.
than say like, the combat system is good or it isn't. I think there's different kinds of conversations to be had about those kinds of things, and I think I'd like to, in this hypothetical world, I would write about those kinds of things rather than reviews, which I just don't feel comfortable doing anymore.
Yeah, we found such a hungry audience. We do these things called the Deepest Dive, which is like huge community game clubs where we break a game apart in multi-sections and stuff. And like the audience loves that format so much. And just as a fan, like, I took the idea back from, back in the 1UP days, I used to do those game clubs. And like, I love listening to that incredibly in-depth stuff. And I love that even now people are still hungry for like, why aren't more outlets getting more and more in-depth? We want to actually focus on tiny details that we love about games.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing about media now is because you can have the usual preview marketing cycle leading into the review, which is the big bang. And then you do your spoiler casts, which are great because that's my favorite thing right now because it just shows everybody thinking super critically about narrative. Because spoiler casts are almost always about the story.
I mean, The Last of Us, without spoiling anything.
Heavy focus.
Yeah, without spoiling anything, like The Last of Us spoiler cast I listened to, it's like multi-hour discussions. Then they're like, oh yeah, and I guess there's some gameplay in the game as well. Like it's just completely on the back burner. It's
such an interesting new way to explore critical thought in the way that conventional game reviews don't allow. And I think now I'm starting to formulate and articulate a better answer to the original question of what I would do and why I wouldn't do reviews.
There we go.
Because I think that generalist conversation and breakdowns of systems and then doing it broadly, right? Combat systems. We're going to talk about combat. We're going to talk about gameplay. They're so high level. And they need to be because that's what people want. In a review, they don't want this bullshit that you and I are talking about, like these super deep dive 4-hour podcasts. They don't want that in the review. They want to get the pluses and minuses and the number at the end, and that helps them make a buying decision, and that's perfect.
Yeah.
But for me, the conversations that are more interesting are these things that we're talking about now, which is the deeper dive spoiler cast and the book club analysis format, where you can dig into, okay, this week, we're not talking about story. We are only talking about combat. And in Ghost of Tsushima, we're going to talk about the various stances and how the rock, paper, scissors relationship works with the different enemy classes. And you start breaking down a broad part of a game into its individual components and seeing and learning how they fit together, right? It's like unpacking something and then rebuilding it in conversation.
Yeah.
It's f***ing awesome. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you miss being in the press?
I used to more than I do now. Like, I miss writing about games, and I miss especially just like being on camera with Bryan Altano and Max Scoville and being idiots. Like, I miss that. I don't miss like waking up at 8 a.m. and seeing that Kotaku got some scoop and being pissed that we didn't get it, and like, okay, is the UK team on this, or do I need to write the story from my bed on my laptop right now?
Right.
Like, and that's like the most boring, stupid shit to complain about, but it was part of the job, and it was a job, right? And there's highs and there's lows, and there's a lot of fucking highs. I loved working at IGN. Man, that was like the best possible way to spend my 20s because I got to hang out with my friends, talk about games all day, and basically go on crazy trips around the world on somebody else's dime. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I could not be more privileged and lucky to be in that position and have had that life. But I don't miss having to go into the office every day and be on and like, okay, I'm a personality today and I need to perform and I need to entertain, and it's great. I love that. I still to some degree like the theatricality of that. But it's just not what I want to do anymore. Like, I'm the more I can get like away from a camera, even though I'm enjoying this conversation we're having, the more I can get away from a camera and just like sit in a dark corner and tip tap 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 type about things on my own, like the happier I'm going to be creatively. And that obviously comes with like years of having lived a very different experience, and met different kinds of people living a different experience, and being in a community that has different priorities and lines of critical thought about games media and game development. Like, it's just, you're shaped by the environment you're in to some degree, and I've definitely learned a lot from people in the game dev community, and especially in Montreal where it is rich. There's just so many people here who make games and do it very fucking well. Yeah, I think I vaguely got off track.
No, I think you got it, man. So you miss IGN, but some of the leadership.
I do. That was the crux of it is, yeah, I do, and I don't miss Games Press, but god damn it, I miss IGN.
I get it. Even though you were tweeting recently about some of the leadership at IGN at that time was less than stellar for the team.
Correct.
Do you want to unpack that a little bit? How your thinking has evolved in that era? Is it a thing of throughout the years you look back on that more and more and be like, oh, you know what? Those are real pieces of shit at the top there.
That's kind of it.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from distance and perspective and looking at leaders and how they treat their teams. And obviously it's influenced a lot by the significantly worse and more severe conditions that other people have experienced in other places. Or even the worst experiences that people had at IGN than I did. Seeing that really puts a lot of shit in perspective very quickly. But beyond that, over time, spending time in a different professional environment, right? Game dev and a company like EA is much more structured. It's a capital B business.
Mm-hmm.
It reframes how I think about things and what I want from places I work. And seeing good leadership and bad leadership. And at IGN, we had some good leadership, some bad leadership, but I didn't have a lot of the perspective to know what about it was good or bad. I just knew that at times we were frustrated. And it became clearer over time that the issues we had with specific people wasn't just grumping at work, right? Like we go out for beers and we grump, this person, that person, bullshit that happened today.
Yeah.
I go back to work tomorrow and it's fine and we deal with it. And it was just part of the it was the normalized part of that work culture as it had been established by those people for decades.
Yeah.
But then, the more younger, smarter voices came into IGN, the more it became clear that this doesn't quite fit. There's something wrong with the way that certain people in charge are treating people and running this place. Very relieved to know for a fact that IGN is in a healthier, happier, better place unilaterally.
Right. Yeah, it's a good note for sure. You tweeted the story of when you wrote the story about Amy Hennig leaving Naughty Dog, how you were pressured to include some rumors and hearsay that it was Neil and Bruce at the time that pushed her out the door.
Yeah, and some misinterpretation on that too is that when I call it gossip and hearsay, it's purely because we didn't confirm anything, right?
Yeah.
We had chased various things about Naughty Dog after that because it was a big deal. Amy left Naughty Dog. That was the story. That was the only thing we cared about. That was the interesting thing. And then the notion that there was conniving going on behind the scenes was like, okay, cool. We'll look into that. And we did. And we heard very mixed things on different sides, but not enough to ever confirm anything in a concrete way to write a separate story. So that's why it was frustrating to have that element of that story in that news article. Because it took away from the fact that, and the core story that Amy's gone. That's it. That's what we need to talk about. Right.
And so it was just a matter of the boss at the time saying, I heard that, put that in there. Or, it sounds so simplistic, but that was literally it.
Yeah, and not to dwell too much on throwing certain specific people under the bus, but these are the same people that wrote a news story called The Last Guardian is Cancelled, as written in the middle of the night at E3, without any confirmation of any kind from anybody on the IGN scene. Right. So there were frustrating things going on, with people in a position of power to do whatever they want and tell people to do what they wanted. That was just less than ideal for IGN at the time. I bet. And they ejected those people. They are out of their lives forever. And IGN is a better place for it. And so is Games Media.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think about Games Media these days? Is it worth, what's the role of a big legacy media outlet like an IGN? Should people try to work there? Should they just bypass it and start up the Patreon lifestyle? I don't know. It's so different now. When I started at IGN, it was just, obviously they've been doing video for a while, but video was becoming the vertical at IGN at the time, right? It was becoming, we had talked in the editorial team, holy f***, are we going to have jobs in 5 years? Is editorial going to exist? It's all going to be video. Right. Obviously, that's not the case now. Everybody has found a happy middle ground where you can have editorial and video. And with stuff like IGN News, where we had the epiphany of we can just make our articles videos and that'll be amazing and we can kind of double dip. But it's also a genuine way to get your content to a different audience, right? People who are on YouTube but don't want to go to IGN.com and read an article might stumble upon a Call of Duty headline on YouTube from IGN.com and boom, now they get the news. And it was just really good. And I think that was kind of a moment where the way we thought about video was reframed completely. Because it wasn't just, okay, well, we'll do the video review and then we'll have a conversation about the hot topic of the day.
but it became everything we're doing is going to be video. Every conversation or every critical thought that we have in the office every day, boom, make it a video.
Right.
Because if we're interested in talking about it, people are probably going to be interested in hearing it. Not to say that we're the most interesting people in the world, but just that if it engaged me when Bryan had a cool thought, it's like, great, yeah, let's like stop talking. Let's get on video. Let's do this now for real.
Yeah. Smart impulse, but just kind of draining over time, or what's the conclusion after all that?
For me, a little bit, yeah. Like I still enjoy that kind of stuff. I still like being on podcasts. I still like talking to people. I still love writing about games. I think I'm too, like I'm 32 and now I'm like, oh no, I think I'm getting too old for certain things. Like I just don't want to be on all the time. Yeah. I like my solitude and my quiet. And if you give me the option of like, hey, you can do like an hour and a half spoiler cast, or you can spend that time reading a book. It's not a contest. I'm gonna read that book. So it does come down to personal taste and experience, and it's obviously if I had never left IGN and I was still there, I'd probably be stoked as hell to still be doing it. Yeah. But I just in doing different things professionally for my creative impulses, it just redefined what I want to do with that creative time. Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey. I've kept you here for a while. Anything else you're dying to get off your chest? Anything you've been wanting to scream for the last several years and you couldn't? Like what deep, dark shit have I had bottled up this whole time? Please, let it all out. Man, I don't know. I don't think I have any deep darks for you. I'm sorry. Okay. We talked a lot about some weird, we had some frank conversations about some good stuff. Yeah, relatively frank. Yeah. Well, hey, congratulations on the big move in your life and best of luck with all the future freaky projects. Please make them as weird as you want them to be. Thanks, man. That's always the goal. Make it more weird. It's not weird enough yet. Keep going. Absolutely. Cool. Thanks again, Mitch. Appreciate it. Thanks. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. See you next time. Bye. MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. The Deepest Dive is the best, most thorough discussions about games on the internet. Prove us wrong, please. The MinnMax Show podcast airs every Thursday. Patreon supporters vote on what we stream every single week, and a whole lot more. Give us a shot, try subscribing to the YouTube channel, and we hope we can win you over.